but it says an ex-Law and Order SVU star agrees with John Oliver about how Dick Wolf's neatly wrapped up justice doesn't match real life. They're talking about the Law and Order series, not just SVU, but regular Law and Order SVU, the far superior Law and Order Criminal Intent, which went off the air much earlier than the rest of these. And then they actually just brought back Law and Order like this year or like last year, and it's like really bad, I heard. Like it's
that
super
post-COVID resurgence. People thinking that they can get the same feeling they did back in the old days.
You can't do it, man. You can if you watch old stuff. I remember we had an incident here a couple of weeks ago where a super chat, like we lost super chats because like the power flickered. You might have been here.
Yeah, I remember.
So I remember that we had got a super chat that I ended up not reading because when you're in the middle of the show, I forgot there was one that like I read but then forgot that they sent and it went away, where the guy said, I finally started watching NYPD Blue, Brett. Great suggestion. Go watch old stuff. New stuff, garbage. Old stuff, incredible.
It's interesting. I'll say I'm not the biggest fan of John Oliver. That's to say the least.
Go figure, yeah.
Diane, Neal, for context, played Casey Novak in SVU.
One of the ADAs.
She watched John Oliver's deep dive into how law enforcement TV shows have portrayed law enforcement and often influenced the public to have a more positive view of law enforcement when and also
a more positive view if you don't interact with them, a less positive view if you actually do.
How do you know?
What I'm saying is like, okay, it gives you a rose-colored glasses idea of what it's like to be in law enforcement or work in the criminal justice system. But then when you actually interact with them and you realize they're not necessarily out there for justice, and that's not me criticizing them.
If you're in it, you're going to understand the pitfalls of a fictional show, but if you're not directly interfacing with these people and how the justice system works, a TV show is undeniably going to influence your view of it.
The Antifa people would have called it propaganda. That's what they call that.
Right. And I will say John Oliver's exploration of this actually rang true in a lot of ways, even though I don't agree with all of his reasoning about it.
Should we play the first clip?
Sure. Okay. There was a podcast that he used in his segment from Warren Light, who was a former executive producer of SVU.
We might get copyright on this, but
well, as long as it's not the show itself, just the timestamp is 3 minutes 20.
Yep.
We've also found out over time, and this is a little anxiety provoking for me, that a lot of cops aren't trained in how to do their job in cases of sexual assault. And a lot of cops get a lot of their information from watching SVU, which a lot of police departments don't have the time or the money to put people through formal training.
Reminds me of a little movement they had going on in 2020. I don't know if you heard of this one. There was a bunch of people going through cities shouting a slogan called "Defund the Police." Have you heard of it?
No, I don't remember this.
Nobody?
I was asleep.
Okay. It proves the lack of logic behind that type of belief system, but it goes to show.
There's also the reality that throwing funding at things doesn't automatically
work.
Yep. And I totally understand that training for these investigators falls short, and it's unfortunate that they would get training from TV show on how to do their real life job.
But where's he getting that from?
Yeah,
that just sounds like anecdote, because I happen to know a bunch of police officers in New York City, and like they would look at SVU and laugh, I think.
Yeah.
And like my grandfather was a cop, like he would look at he liked watching cop shows, but he would laugh at them a lot of the time, be like, that's ridiculous.
If you watch this full segment, he does provide quotations from actual law enforcement. And
they say they learn from SVU how
and
to do things.
From the victims of assault who say
and that should scare
it influenced the way that they went about reporting.
That's ridiculous. The cops say that? I gotta watch the whole bit.
Well,
that's insane.
There's a long history actually of law enforcement being involved in in how they're portrayed in media. So
Oh yeah, they have they have advisors
Dragnet
on
is what
set.
he begins the segment with. That in 1951, they received authentication from the LAPD in exchange for free usage of like cop cars and their
Now the movie studios have so much money they don't need to do that.
Yeah.
well,
That's-
sure,
that's
but
the funny
like
part.
back in 1951, I'm sure that was like a fair trade, right? So they would kind of have leverage over the way they're portrayed. If Dragnet had portrayed the cops with, I mean, even just making mistakes, but also intentional corruption, they wouldn't have had that agreement anymore.
There are plenty of cop shows that do corrupt like storylines that involve corruption, but it's not the necessarily the baseline of the whole show. But the general idea of this entire piece is that it creates a simplified, rose-colored glasses version of what it's like to actually go through the criminal justice system if you are a victim of an assault. Right? So
Yeah, I don't feel like that's the case. I remember I watched
It
a decent amount
absolutely
of
is.
Law
It
and Order.
absolutely is the case.
Because I watched a lot of Law and Order, and I would be like, a lot of these cases like just go unsolved, and like there's a lot of just people
yeah, but the
looking
ones that
really
get solved
sad.
will never work the way that they do in the shows because of the way you have to actually sacrifice reality for storytelling because
Right.
the storytelling is the most important aspect of it.
I just feel like the
Yeah.
ones I haven't seen a lot of it. Well, I've seen a good amount, but there's so many things I've seen where things just there's no resolution, and it's like that to me seems more like reality
That's not as common as you'd think.
in the show.
I don't know about Law and Order, but in general, that plot is far less pursued than most of these storylines, right?
What John Oliver said about that is he said Law and Order cannot reflect the reality that, you know, a lot of cases go unsolved.
Yeah.
He said it would be unwatchable. Nobody wants to
Right.
watch a show where 97% of episodes end with two lawyers striking a deal in a windowless room.
Yeah.
And then you get to watch the defendant serve 6 months and struggle to get a job at their local Jiffy Lube. The person who's responsible for Law and Order and its brand is Dick Wolf, and he knows exactly what he wants his shows to do and, importantly, not to do. So Dick Wolf has repeatedly said that his show is like an advertisement for joining the force, that he's unabashedly pro-law enforcement.
Right.
And
Go watch Blue Bloods also if you're looking for
haven't.
a cop show. I recommend. I could give you about 10,000 recommendations for cop shows. But if you're looking for a procedural that I think is better than Law and Order, is Blue Bloods, especially the first 4 or 5 seasons with Donnie Wahlberg and Bridget Monahan,
Right.
Tom Selleck. Very, very, very good. And that's about as pro-law enforcement of a show as you can get. But one of the themes of that show is that they handle a lot of hard topics.
Yeah.
Racial profiling, in law enforcement, excessive use of force. But they tackle it from a way where every different character in the family has their own perspective. And they have almost every scene has one scene where the whole family eats dinner together and they kind of debate over what these issues are, oftentimes becoming very heated because they're very heated things to talk about.
Right.
It's very, very interesting if you're looking for a more mainstream level show for something like this. I think everyone would enjoy those, especially those first 4 or 5 seasons.
SVU also shows the law enforcement using excessive force on suspects.
I mean, all of them really
And it's not shown to like shine a light on corruption. It's to glorify it. So given that Dick Wolf is a marketing expert, that's what he did before Law and Order. You can see the angle that was pushed in that show and its spinoff.
And the number one thing that I've noticed in most of these shows is that they've all sort of start to believe in that the means to an end, that becomes like a thing.
Yeah.
That's a very common trope, which
Then glorifying the violation of people's civil liberties
yes,
as
absolutely.
the only way to reach justice for victims.
Yep.
When in reality, that goes somewhere we don't want to go.
Exactly.
Fast.
And then that breeds less relatable characters on both sides, because the only way you can have a bad guy that you're okay with having their civil liberties completely violated just for a confession, thank you, is to make them reprehensible in every way, shape, or form, which doesn't lend itself to interesting storytelling at all.
This was like a conversation that happened with 24 too, right? Like how all the torture scenes that would happen to get someone to talk to save the country or the world or whatever, and you kind of had to, you were oddly rooting for them to happen, but in the real world.
Also, I want to point out that the same thing that this
the red and blue is weirdly fitting.
It is very
the Law and Order discussion.
We're getting pulled over.
It is one of those. They point out that what this does for law enforcement, CSI also did for forensics and prosecution. Everyone on a jury expected that there was going to be some perfect amount of DNA that showed you exactly who the bad guy is, so that they can point at that person and say that's the guy that did it. And most cases don't have that evidence. Those cases, that's my favorite thing. CSI Miami, every case is solved in a day. They never change outfits. It's like
that's about tying up the narrative in a bow, and we understand why they do it. It's not even an indictment of the show or its creators or its fans. It's just the reality. And I mean, we can say don't let TV shows influence how you view the world, but that's literally impossible.
I think that's a problem. I think like it's kind of that porn has done the same thing for romantic relationships for young men, making it impossible for them.
True.
So that they have a harder time connecting because their brain has been overstimulated with something that literally they can't break. So if we look at that for society, that's a problem when we can no longer
what can be done to mitigate that?
Watch less TV or
watch Police Academy,
or have parents that are able to explain to you this is not the real world. But even then, does that work? I don't know.
So I want to play this clip of Mariska Hargitay, who played Olivia Benson in Law & Order SVU, because she had something really positive to say about this exact phenomenon.
Okay. The show's
encountered people that have said because of this show, they knew what to do after their assault. Because of this show, they had a rape kit done. Because of this show, they reported and had faith in that. And because of this show, most of all, they didn't feel alone anymore. And to me, when I started hearing those stories is when I knew that it wasn't just a TV show anymore. It was so much more.
This message is brought to you by Dick Wolf.
Yeah.
I mean,
I'm sure there's truth to it, though.
Yeah, there is truth to it,
sure.
but also, should it give victims or the people in the personal lives of victims an idea that justice is always reachable and give them a false sense of hope when really, like, the people you encounter, even your own attorney, are so jaded and cynical after seeing case after case go unsolved.
Is she talking about finding justice, though, or is it just like the just going forward to the authorities and saying this happened to me? You know, like I feel like that's different than giving people hope. Although I think the show might have done that. It's not showing the dark side of that, I think. Yeah. And
so
that's
this is
the problem, that it's inherent to it. And we're not going to call for them to change the show and make it more realistic.
No. I don't want it to be more realistic.
It only needs to be pointed out.
This is like you were saying with CSI and all that stuff. This is just escapism.
Yes.
It almost seemed like Diane Neal was apologizing for how the show portrayed it to victims. She said, if Olivia Benson were real, there would be a lot more justice. I'm embarrassed to admit I used to think the way it worked on the show was like real life. Then I found out the hard way that I was wrong. Thank you for sharing the story of your real experience. I am sorry.
Yep. That was a person who said that they reported him. The cops didn't believe them. But you're also being told the story of one single person, and there's a world full of cops, all of which have different life experiences, different approaches to the job, some good, some bad. You can't expect, if you're going into every experience in your life expecting your interactions to be with somebody that happened to be like a character in a TV show, you're going to be sorely disappointed every single time.
Have you had a lot of negative experiences with the police?
I have. Getting kicked out of skate spots can be confrontational. I've been pulled over before. You hands 10 and 2 and don't talk back was always my motto. I can't say that I had a bunch of horrible. I had definitely unpleasant ones where we got putting back cop cars when we got caught skating inside a stadium, given tickets, had to go to court, things like that. But no overtly awful experiences with law enforcement.
I've had a lot of bad ones. And I still I have a respect for the idea of police to some degree. Like my grandfather was one, and I think he was a pretty good guy. But yeah, I've been torn out of cars and thrown in the woods sitting Indian style while they search your car and stuff like that for no reason, going 5 miles over the speed limit. So it's like, I understand. It's just, it really depends on who you get and what kind of day they're having. There's good and there's bad, like in every type of industry. Unfortunately,
this is just a problem without a solution.
You just can't. You have to start teaching people to understand this is not the real world, and what they're telling you is they're not trying to. There's a big premium put on the idea of creating TV and movies that have realism. It's not realism. It may be darker in tone, but that doesn't make it realistic, because realistic would be boring.
Reality TV isn't even real.
Exactly.
Documentaries aren't even real.
Exactly.
Nothing is real, people.
All of it is narrative driven.
Yes.
And that's the way it is.
Yep.
Thanks for watching this clip, guys. If you want to see full episodes or follow us on social media, links are in the description below. Bye.
Bye.